Here, Caitlin Clark just dancing with the basketball.
She's done. Not injured, not suspended, not taking a break. Caitlin Clark, the most electrifying player women's basketball has ever seen, has walked away from Team USA. And here's the part that's going to make your jaw hit the floor. It wasn't her choice that started this war. It was theirs. What I'm about to reveal isn't speculation. It isn't rumor. It's the culmination of months of behind-the-scenes tension that finally exploded in ways nobody saw coming. And when you hear what happened inside that training facility, what was said, what was done, and who pulled the trigger on this catastrophic fallout, you're going to understand exactly why the future of women's basketball just changed forever. This isn't just drama. This is a betrayal. Let's rewind for a moment, because to understand the magnitude of what just happened, you need to feel the weight of what Caitlin Clark represents. This is a player who shattered records that stood for decades. A player who filled arenas that had never seen more than a few hundred fans. A player who took college basketball and turned it into must-watch television for millions of people who had never cared about the women's game before. She didn't just play basketball. She transformed it. And what did she get in return from the institution that's supposed to celebrate greatness? A slap in the face. You remember the 2024 Olympic snub. The whole world remembers it. The controversy that erupted when the most dominant scorer in the country was left off the roster sent shockwaves through the sports world. Fans were furious. Analysts were baffled. Former players came out publicly questioning the decision. But the official narrative? It's about team chemistry. She needs to pay her dues. The veterans have earned their spots. Except here's the thing nobody wanted to admit out loud. It was never about chemistry. It was never about dues. It was about control. And now, after what just leaked from inside a closed-door training camp, the truth is impossible to hide. Sources with direct knowledge of the situation have revealed details that paint a disturbing picture. This wasn't a basketball evaluation. This was a message being sent, loud and clear, to a 22-year-old superstar who had the audacity to become bigger than the system itself. What happened during those scrimmages wasn't coaching. It was humiliation. And the person reportedly orchestrating this entire power play? Coach Cheryl Reeve. The same coach who made the controversial Olympic decision. The same coach who has repeatedly downplayed Clark's impact. The same coach who, according to insiders, has made it her personal mission to prove that no single player, no matter how talented, no matter how popular, will dictate the direction of her program. But this time she pushed too far. Because Caitlin Clark didn't fight back publicly. She didn't create a media circus. She did something far more powerful. She simply stopped showing up. The silence spoke louder than any press conference ever could. When Caitlin Clark declined her invitation to the upcoming Team USA mini-camps, she didn't send a scathing letter. She didn't call out names. She didn't give the media the explosive soundbite they were desperately waiting for. She just said no. And in that single word, that quiet, calculated refusal, she delivered a message that echoed through every corner of women's basketball. I don't need you. You need me. Think about the audacity of that move. Think about what it takes for a 22-year-old athlete, still in the early stages of her professional career, to look at the most prestigious basketball program in the world and walk away. Most players would kill for the opportunity. Most players would swallow their pride, accept whatever role they were given, and pray for a chance to prove themselves. But Caitlin Clark isn't most players. She's a generational talent who understands something that the old guard refuses to accept. The game has changed. The power dynamics have shifted. And in 2024, the players who move the needle, the players who sell tickets and drive ratings and inspire millions, hold more leverage than they ever have before. Clark knows her worth, and that terrifies the people in charge. Let's talk about what actually happened inside that training camp, because the details that have emerged are absolutely damning. According to multiple sources who were present during the sessions, Clark arrived ready to compete. She came in early. She stayed late. She did everything right from a preparation standpoint. This was supposed to be her chance to silence the critics, to prove that she belonged on that Olympic roster, to show Coach Reeve that she could fit into any system. But from the moment practice began, something felt off. During 5-on-5 scrimmages, the drills that matter most, the situations that showcase a player's true ability to impact winning basketball, Clark was positioned in ways that made no competitive sense. She wasn't running point. She wasn't getting touches in transition where she's most dangerous. She wasn't being put in positions to showcase the skills that made her the most prolific scorer in college basketball history. Instead, she was stationed in the corner, standing, watching, waiting for a ball that rarely came. Picture this: the player who averaged over 30 points per game in college, the player who broke Pete Maravich's all-time scoring record, the player who single-handedly filled arenas across America, standing in the corner while plays were designed for veterans who haven't had her impact in years. This wasn't a coaching strategy. This was a statement. Witnesses described an uncomfortable atmosphere. tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Other players reportedly exchanged glances, sensing that something was deeply wrong with how their teammate was being treated. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. When Clark finally approached the coaching staff to ask about her role, a completely reasonable question for any professional athlete, she wasn't met with explanation. She wasn't given constructive feedback. She wasn't treated like the superstar she is. What she received instead was cold, dismissive silence. And that silence told her everything she needed to know about her future with Team USA. The coaching staff knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a calculated decision by people who had already made up their minds about Caitlin Clark long before she ever stepped foot in that training facility. And the architect of this entire situation? Coach Cheryl Reeve. To understand what's really happening here, you need to understand Cheryl Reeve. She's not just any coach. She's a 4-time WNBA champion, a respected figure in women's basketball for over 2 decades. A woman who has built her entire legacy on the principle that team comes first, that systems matter more than individuals, that no player, no matter how talented, is bigger than the collective. It's a philosophy that has served her well. It's a philosophy that has produced championships. But here's the problem. Caitlin Clark represents something that directly challenges everything Reeve believes in. Clark isn't just a player. She's a phenomenon. She's a brand. She's a movement that has brought unprecedented attention to a sport that has long struggled for mainstream recognition. When she plays, cameras follow. When she speaks, headlines are written. When she posts on social media, millions engage. In the modern landscape of sports, that kind of influence translates to power. Real power. The kind of power that can shift conversations, change narratives, and, if left unchecked, potentially undermine the authority of coaches who have spent decades building their programs. And for someone like Cheryl Reeve, that's an existential threat. Think about it from her perspective. She's worked her entire career to reach this position. She's sacrificed countless hours perfecting her craft. She's earned every ounce of respect she has in this league. And now, a 22-year-old rookie walks in with more social media followers than the entire Team USA program combined? That's not just uncomfortable. That's destabilizing. The tension between old-school coaching philosophy and new-age player empowerment has been brewing for years. But in Caitlin Clark, that tension has found its ultimate flashpoint. When asked about integrating young superstars into the national team system, Reeve's recent comments to the media were telling. She talked about chemistry. She emphasized paying dues. She stressed the importance of fitting into the established culture. On the surface, these seem like reasonable coaching principles. But read between the lines and the message becomes crystal clear. Fall in line or get left behind. It's the same narrative that was used to justify Clark's Olympic snub. The same tired excuse that prioritized team dynamics over undeniable talent. The same dismissive approach that told a generational player she hadn't earned her spot, despite being the most decorated college athlete in the history of the sport. But here's where Cheryl Reeve made her fatal miscalculation. She assumed Caitlin Clark would bend. She assumed this young player would eventually accept her diminished role, swallow her pride, and wait patiently for permission to shine. She was wrong. What Reeve failed to understand is that Clark has options. Options that players of previous generations never had. She doesn't need Team USA to validate her greatness. She doesn't need an Olympic roster spot to prove her worth. The WNBA needs her. Sponsors need her. The entire sport needs her. And she knows it. So what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? You get destruction. You get chaos. You get the kind of fallout that reshapes everything it touches. And right now, women's basketball is standing in the middle of the wreckage. When news first broke that Caitlin Clark had declined her Team USA invitations, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted. Sports talk shows dedicated entire segments to dissecting the situation. Former players, current players, analysts, and fans all weighed in with opinions that ranged from outrage to disbelief. But one reaction stood out above all the others. Silence from Team USA. For hours after the story broke, there was no official statement. No clarification. No damage control of any kind. Just a deafening void where accountability should have been. And in that silence, the narrative took on a life of its own. Fans who had supported Clark from her Iowa days flooded comment sections with fury. The hashtag Justice for Caitlin started trending within minutes. Petitions demanding Cheryl Reeve's removal as head coach began circulating. The backlash wasn't just passionate, it was organized, relentless, and growing by the hour. But here's what made the situation even more explosive. Clark wasn't the only one who noticed the mistreatment. According to sources inside the training camp, Several players witnessed what happened during those scrimmages. They saw how Clark was positioned. They saw how she was ignored. They saw the cold shoulder she received when she asked basic questions about her role. And some of them were deeply uncomfortable with what they witnessed. Now let me be clear. No active player has gone on record criticizing Coach Reeve or the Team USA leadership. That would be career suicide. But behind closed doors, whispers are spreading through the league. Conversations are happening in locker rooms. Text chains are lighting up between players who are starting to question whether this situation was handled appropriately. Because here's the thing that every professional athlete understands. Today it's Caitlin Clark, but tomorrow it could be anyone. If the most marketable player in women's basketball can be treated this way, if a generational talent can be iced out for reasons that seem more personal than professional, what does that say about the system? What does that say about the power dynamics that every player must navigate? This isn't just about one athlete anymore. This is about the culture of women's basketball itself. And that's why what happens next matters so much. Meanwhile, as the controversy swirls, Caitlin Clark has remained remarkably composed. She hasn't posted cryptic messages. She hasn't liked shady tweets. She hasn't done anything to publicly fuel the fire. Instead, she's doing something far more powerful. She's showing up. Reports from inside Fever facilities indicate that Clark has been absolutely locked in on her WNBA preparation. Extra shooting sessions, film study into the late hours, conditioning work that has impressed even the most demanding trainers. She's letting her work speak for itself. But make no mistake, behind that focused exterior, a decision has been made. A line has been drawn. And Caitlin Clark has made it abundantly clear where her priorities now lie. The numbers don't lie. And right now, they're screaming a truth that Team USA cannot afford to ignore. Let's talk about what Caitlin Clark actually means to women's basketball. Not in emotional terms, not in subjective opinions, but in cold, hard data that executives and sponsors care about more than anything else. During her final season at Iowa, Caitlin Clark's games averaged over 4 million viewers. 4 million. To put that in perspective, that's more than most NBA playoff games. That's more than the World Series in some years. That's a number that advertisers dream about and networks fight over. When she entered the WNBA draft, it became the most watched draft in league history. Her jersey sales broke records within hours. Her social media following dwarfed entire franchises combined. The Indiana Fever, a team that had struggled for years, suddenly became one of the hottest tickets in professional sports. This isn't hype. This is a fundamental transformation of an entire industry. And Team USA just told her she wasn't welcome. Now think about what that means for international competition. Think about the viewers who tuned into Olympic basketball specifically to watch Clark. Think about the sponsors who were already lining up partnerships around her potential Team USA involvement. Think about the casual fans, the millions of people who don't follow basketball closely but know exactly who Caitlin Clark is. They're not going to watch anymore. Without Clark, Team USA becomes just another basketball team. Talented? Absolutely. Capable of winning gold? Probably. But culturally relevant? Appointment television? A must-watch event that transcends the sport? Not even close. The people making these decisions seem to have forgotten something fundamental. Sports entertainment is about stars. It's about personalities that capture the public imagination. It's about stories that people invest in emotionally, and they just push their biggest star out the door. But here's where the situation gets even more complicated. Because while Team USA deals with the PR nightmare of losing their most marketable player, another conversation is happening behind the scenes, one that could have far-reaching implications for Coach Cheryl Reeve's future. Sources close to USA Basketball's leadership have indicated that there's growing concern about how this situation has been handled. While Reeve maintains strong support from certain factions within the organization, others are reportedly questioning whether her personal feelings about Clark have compromised her judgment. The question being whispered in boardrooms is uncomfortable but necessary. Is Cheryl Reeve's coaching philosophy more important than the growth of women's basketball itself? Because right now, those two things appear to be in direct conflict. Reeve's defenders argue that she's protecting the integrity of the program. They claim that allowing any player to dictate terms would set a dangerous precedent. They insist that the system must remain bigger than any individual. But her critics see something different. They see a coach who let ego override opportunity. They see a leader who failed to adapt to a changing landscape. They see someone who may have just caused irreparable damage to the sport's mainstream momentum. And here's the most troubling part of all. According to insiders, Reeve has shown no signs of reconsidering her approach. No signs of reaching out to Clark's camp. No signs of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, mistakes were made. If anything, she's doubling down. Doubling down might be the most dangerous decision Cheryl Reeve has ever made. Because while she's busy protecting her principles, the world around her is moving on fast. And the opportunities slipping through Team USA's fingers may never come back. Let's talk about what's happening internationally. Because this story isn't just making waves in America. It's reverberating across the entire global basketball community. Reports have emerged that several overseas leagues have taken notice of the Clark situation. European teams, Asian markets, emerging basketball programs that have been desperately searching for star power to elevate their visibility. And suddenly, Caitlin Clark represents something irresistible: availability. Now, let me be crystal clear. There's no indication that Clark is considering leaving the WNBA. Her commitment to the Fever appears rock solid. But the international exhibition market? The off-season opportunities? The global brand partnerships that typically flow through Team USA channels? Those doors are wide open now. Think about what that means. Instead of representing the red, white, and blue on the world's biggest stages, Clark could potentially align herself with international events that have nothing to do with USA basketball. She could participate in exhibitions, showcases, and promotional tours that bypass the national team entirely. And every single one of those appearances would remind the world of what Team USA gave up. But the international implications are just the beginning. Because back home, something even more significant is unfolding. The WNBA is watching this situation very, very closely. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has built her entire strategic vision around player empowerment and league growth. She's championed stars. She's prioritized marketing individual talents. She's worked tirelessly to position the WNBA as a destination league rather than a stepping stone. And Caitlin Clark is the centerpiece of that vision. Now imagine the awkwardness of that position. The WNBA and USA Basketball are technically aligned organizations. They share resources, personnel, and institutional relationships. But their interests in this situation couldn't be more different. The WNBA needs Clark front and center, happy, thriving, and generating maximum exposure. USA Basketball just made her feel unwelcome in the most public way possible. Those are conflicting agendas. And someone is going to have to choose a side. Whispers from league offices suggest that there's growing frustration with how this controversy is reflecting on women's basketball as a whole. Every negative headline about the Clark situation is a headline that could have been about something positive. Every debate about coaching politics is a conversation that isn't happening about the incredible talent in the league. The distraction is becoming a liability. And here's what makes this moment so critical. The WNBA is at an inflection point. Viewership is up. Attendance is growing. Investment is pouring in at unprecedented levels. The league has never been better positioned for mainstream breakthrough. But breakthroughs are fragile things. They require momentum. They require positive narratives. They require the stars to shine without unnecessary shadows. Right now, the Clark controversy is casting a very long shadow. Some league insiders are starting to ask an uncomfortable question. How much longer can the WNBA afford to stay neutral while USA Basketball alienates its most valuable asset? The answer might be coming sooner than anyone expects. The pressure is building from every direction, and cracks are starting to show. Former players have begun speaking out, carefully, strategically, but unmistakably. And their words are adding fuel to an already raging fire. Just this week, a WNBA legend who won multiple Olympic gold medals made a statement that sent shockwaves through the basketball community. Without naming names directly, she said something that everyone understood perfectly. When I played, we embraced greatness. We didn't try to diminish it. The national team should be a celebration of our best players, not a political battlefield. Read that again. Political battlefield. Those words weren't chosen accidentally. They were a direct shot at the current leadership. A public acknowledgement that what's happening with Caitlin Clark isn't about basketball merit. It's about something uglier, something more personal, something that has no place in elite competition. And she wasn't alone. Another former Olympian took to social media with a message that was even more pointed. She wrote about her own experiences with Team USA, describing a culture of inclusion and mutual respect that made her proud to wear the jersey. Then she added a single devastating sentence. I hope today's players are experiencing the same thing. The implication was unmistakable. She doesn't believe they are. These aren't random commentators throwing opinions into the void. These are Hall of Fame caliber players. Women who built the foundation that current stars stand on. Women whose voices carry tremendous weight in the basketball community. And they're choosing to speak now. Why? Because they can see what's at stake. The women's basketball movement took decades to build. Generations of players sacrificed, struggled, and persevered to create opportunities that didn't exist before them. They played in empty arenas. They fought for scraps of media attention. They watched male athletes earn millions while they worked second jobs just to survive. And finally, the moment has arrived. The visibility, the investment, the cultural relevance they always deserved. Caitlin Clark represents the culmination of all that sacrifice. She's proof that women's basketball can captivate the masses. She's living evidence that the sport can produce superstars who transcend athletics. And the people who built this foundation are watching the current leadership potentially destroy everything. That's why they're speaking out. That's why they're risking relationships and political capital. Because the stakes are too high to remain silent. But here's what makes this moment even more volatile. The generational divide isn't just about Clark. It's about philosophy. It's about vision. It's about fundamentally different understandings of what women's basketball should be. The old guard believes in earned respect, hierarchy, paying dues before receiving privileges. These aren't inherently bad values. They built championship teams for decades. But the new generation sees things differently. They believe talent should speak for itself. They believe marketability matters. They believe that the players who grow the game deserve recognition regardless of how many years they've logged. Neither side is entirely wrong. But right now, they're locked in a battle that's tearing the sport apart. And caught in the middle of this war is a 22-year-old woman who just wanted to play basketball. The question nobody can answer yet, is there any path forward that doesn't end in permanent damage? Let's talk about what Caitlin Clark is doing while the world burns around her. Because while everyone else is debating, arguing, and choosing sides, she's made a choice of her own. A choice that reveals more about her character than any press conference ever could. She's grinding. Sources close to the Fever organization describe a player who has completely compartmentalized the controversy. When Clark walks into the practice facility, the drama stays outside. There's no distraction, no visible frustration, no wasted energy on things she cannot control. Just work. Her training regimen has intensified to levels that even surprised her coaches. Extended shooting sessions that stretch late into the evening. Film study that borders on obsessive. Physical conditioning designed to make her body bulletproof for the long WNBA season ahead. She's not just preparing for games. She's preparing for war. And make no mistake, what's coming next is absolutely war. Every opponent will circle the games against Clark on their calendar. Every defense will scheme specifically for her. Every arena she enters will be packed with fans who either worship her or desperately want to see her fail. The target on her back has never been bigger. But here's what separates elite competitors from everyone else. They don't shrink from pressure. They feed on it. They use it as fuel. They transform hostility into motivation. And Caitlin Clark? She's been handling pressure since she was a teenager. Remember when she walked into Iowa as a freshman and immediately became the focal point of the program? Remember when she broke scoring records that had stood for generations while carrying the weight of an entire fanbase's expectations? Remember when she filled arenas, drew national television audiences, and became the face of women's college basketball, all before her 21st birthday? Pressure isn't new to her. It's her natural habitat. What's different now is the scale, the stakes, the permanence of the decisions being made. Because here's the reality that everyone needs to understand. Caitlin Clark doesn't need Team USA to define her legacy. But Team USA might need Caitlin Clark to remain relevant. That power dynamic has shifted dramatically. And Clark seems to understand it perfectly. By focusing entirely on her professional career, by declining the invitations, by redirecting her energy, by making the Fever her absolute priority, she's sending a message that transcends basketball. She's saying, my value isn't determined by whether you select me. My value is determined by what I create on my own terms. That's not arrogance. That's clarity. And it's a level of self-awareness that most athletes never achieve, regardless of age or experience. But while Clark builds her future, the present situation continues to deteriorate. Because the fallout from this controversy has created wounds that may never fully heal. Relationships have been damaged. Trust has been broken. Lines have been drawn that cannot easily be erased. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, a ticking clock is counting down to the next major international competition. The question that haunts everyone involved. When that moment arrives, what will women's basketball look like? The clock is ticking, and time is running out for reconciliation. The next major international window is approaching faster than anyone wants to admit. Rosters will need to be finalized. Training camps will need to be scheduled. Decisions that will define the next era of women's basketball will need to be made. And right now, those decisions are heading toward disaster. Let's game out the scenarios, because each possible path forward carries enormous consequences. Scenario 1. Team USA reaches out to Clark's camp, acknowledges the mishandling of the situation, and offers a genuine fresh start. Cheryl Reeve either adjusts her approach or steps aside for someone willing to properly integrate the sport's biggest star. This is the dream scenario. The outcome that would heal wounds, unite factions, and position women's basketball for unprecedented growth. Imagine Clark wearing Team USA jersey, playing alongside the best in the world, representing her country on the global stage. The ratings would be historic. The cultural impact would be massive. The message would be clear. Women's basketball puts talent first. But here's the problem. There's zero indication this scenario is realistic. Reeve has shown no willingness to compromise. USA basketball leadership has remained frustratingly silent. And Clark's camp has made it clear that the ball is not in their court anymore. Too much damage has been done. Too many lines have been crossed. Which brings us to scenario 2. The current trajectory continues. Clark remains focused on the WNBA. Team USA moves forward without her. The two paths diverge permanently. In this scenario, Team USA can probably still win. They have depth. They have experience. They have a system that's produced results for years. But winning won't be enough. Because while the team collects medals, the sport will be bleeding momentum. Casual viewers won't tune in. Sponsors will question their investments. The narrative surrounding women's basketball will shift from inspiration to controversy. Every victory will be tainted by the same question. How much better could this be with Caitlin Clark? And here's the truly terrifying possibility. Scenario 3. The rift becomes permanent, and the damage spreads beyond just Team USA. What if this controversy fractures the entire women's basketball ecosystem? What if other young stars see how Clark was treated and decide they want no part of the national team? What if the generational divide between veterans and newcomers becomes an unbridgeable chasm? These aren't paranoid fantasies. There are legitimate concerns being discussed by people who understand the sport deeply. The culture of any organization is defined by how it treats its most visible members. And right now, the culture of Team USA is being defined by exclusion, politics, and ego. That's a dangerous precedent. A precedent that could haunt women's basketball for decades. Young players watching this situation are learning a lesson. Maybe not the lesson anyone intended, but a lesson nonetheless. They're learning that talent isn't always enough. They're learning that fitting in matters more than standing out. They're learning that challenging the establishment, even unintentionally, comes with severe consequences. Is that the message women's basketball wants to send to its future stars? Is that the culture that will attract the next generation of transcendent athletes? The answers seem obvious, but the people with power to change course seem unwilling to see them. And so the clock keeps ticking. The deadline keeps approaching. And the window for salvation keeps shrinking. Something has to give. The question is what, and when, and whether it will be too late. This is where we are. This is what it's come to. The most talented player of her generation standing on one side. The institution that's supposed to represent the best of American basketball, standing on the other. And between them, a chasm that grows wider with every passing day. Caitlin Clark didn't ask for this war. She didn't create this controversy. She simply showed up, played basketball at a level nobody had ever seen before, and became something the sport desperately needed. A genuine superstar who could capture the attention of the entire world. And for that she was punished. Not with words. Not with public criticism. But with something far more insidious. Exclusion disguised as philosophy. Disrespect masked as tradition. Personal vendetta wrapped in the language of team chemistry. They tried to dim her light. They tried to remind her of her place. They tried to send a message that the system would never bend, no matter how brightly any individual star might shine. But they forgot something crucial. You can't dim a supernova. Caitlin Clark has responded to this entire situation with a maturity that belies her 22 years. She hasn't engaged in public battles. She hasn't thrown anyone under the bus. She hasn't given the media the explosive drama they were hoping for. Instead, she made a decision. A quiet, powerful, definitive decision. She chose herself. She chose to invest her energy where it's valued. She chose to focus on a career that doesn't require permission from people who clearly don't want to give it. She chose to bet on her own greatness rather than begging for validation from a system that seems determined to deny it. And in making that choice, she's changed everything. Because here's what's going to happen next. Caitlin Clark is going to dominate the WNBA. She's going to break records, fill arenas, generate headlines, and continue to be the most magnetic force in women's basketball. Every incredible pass will remind people what Team USA is missing. Every deep three-pointer will highlight the absence on the national roster. Every time she elevates the fever to new heights, Questions will resurface about the decisions that kept her off the Olympic stage. She doesn't need to say a word. Her game will speak volumes. Meanwhile, Team USA will face a reckoning. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not publicly. But internally, the questions will persist. The tension will remain. The knowledge that they let something precious slip away will linger like a wound that never fully heals. Cheryl Reeve may keep her position. She may continue to win games. She may even add more medals to her collection. But her legacy is now permanently stained by this controversy. History will remember the coach who had Caitlin Clark available and chose pride over progress, who prioritized control over championship potential, who let personal feelings override the best interests of women's basketball. That's not a legacy anyone should want. And what about the sport itself? What about women's basketball as a whole? The truth is, this moment represents a crossroads, a defining chapter that will be analyzed for years to come. One path leads to growth, inclusion, and a future where transcendent talents are celebrated rather than suppressed, where the system adapts to greatness instead of demanding that greatness conform to the system. The other path leads to stagnation, to a sport that had everything it needed for mainstream breakthrough but couldn't get out of its own way, to a cautionary tale about what happens when institutions prioritize politics over potential. The choice should be obvious. But as we've seen, obvious choices aren't always the ones being made. So where does this leave us? It leaves us watching, waiting, hoping that somehow, some way the people with power will recognize what's at stake before it's too late. It leaves us cheering for Caitlin Clark as she writes her own story, a story that no longer requires Team USA's approval. And it leaves us with one undeniable truth that will echo through every game, every season, every chapter of women's basketball from this moment forward. They had her, and they let her go. Some mistakes can be corrected. Some bridges can be rebuilt. But some decisions change everything forever. This was one of them.